Hello and welcome to Fun Problems. The problems are fun. I'm Peter C. Hayward.
I'm AJ Brandon.
And we have decided to sit on opposite sides of the screen to balance the video. AJ,
Ooh, I like
why
what you
is that
did there.
super relevant?
Because we're talking about how to balance your game. Part 2.
Part 2. I should mention this episode is sponsored by Trader Joe's Aussie-style biscuits. In that during our break between episodes, I went and got them, and I'm going to be eating them over the course of this episode. So you may, if you're watching on YouTube, you may get to witness a Tim Tam slam. What's that?
I'm not going to shamelessly plug my drink. You'll just have to pay attention to what I drink and go buy it yourself.
Until they
And if
pay
you're an
us,
audio listener,
no
you
free
just
promos. You'll never, if you drink in a specific way, we'll know. We'll know.
They'll hear the sound of me sipping to the can.
Yeah, the satisfying sip that only a Diet Dr. Pepper can give.
All right, audio listeners, this is for you.
Oh, God, that's so disgusting. It's so disgusting. It can't be Diet Dr. Pepper.
All right, let's just dive right in, shall we?
Yes, this is part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1, recommend doing that because we're not going to recap. Let's go.
Be cautious with data. Got some examples here. I know Peter loves examples. So, Peter, I have a question for you.
Yes.
If you're trying to determine the strength of a card and you're looking at a data set, is win rate when this card is included in your deck useful?
Yes. It's not the most useful, but it is definitely useful.
Sure. We're very pedantic and completely correct answer. Is win rate when played accurate or useful? Whatever term you want to use.
I mean, yeah, same answer. I feel like my answer is going to be the same for all of these, which is unhelpful.
Yes. So the more helpful of those ones...
I got to examine the premise first. Useful towards what goal?
Dear. Peter, we got 6 pages of this stuff.
You asked me questions. You know, we've done 56 episodes of this, AJ. You know how this works.
I'm skipping to the punchline. We got too many pages. I'm sorry.
Hit me.
The more useful metric between besides those ones is win rate in hand when drawn. Because if you have a big expensive card, then when you play it, often you're going to end up winning the game. If it's in your deck, you may never end up drawing it, so it doesn't matter at all.
The implied context here is a card that costs something. Like you're talking Magic the Gathering, right?
Sure.
I was in a whole other world of like systems.
Sure. Yeah. Magic the Gathering is my default one. Thank you for calling that out. Yes. So in Magic the Gathering, as an example, if you have an expensive card, then it can clog your hand. You don't actually have the chance to play it, so you might lose because you drew the card. So that's a more useful metric to look at. So when you're looking at win rates of factions, if you're looking at win rates of cards, if you're looking at those sorts of data-driven approaches, I would just caution you to be careful about exactly what you're looking at and what pitfalls you might run into looking at some subset of the data.
I don't think a data-driven approach is that helpful.
I also agree with that.
So I question the whole premise of this exercise. I think that it is I think that as gamers, we want there to be a right answer. This actually directly relates to our fun question for the last episode. I think we want there to be a right answer and a wrong answer. And so if you have a spreadsheet, that's more likely to give you the right answer. And maybe we should have actually started this whole balance thing in terms of like how important is different types of balance? Because win rate if card is played from hand is like I've designed 100 games and I've published 25 and I've got 30 more on the way. I've never factored that in. I don't think I ever will factor that in. I just don't think that's an interesting question on any level, or even a useful question compared to almost anything else you can be doing with your time. I'm much more about experiential play. I'm much more about, was it fun to play? Was it fun to play against? I care very little about, like, did someone win when they had this particular card in their hand and they played it? For me, it's just like, no, is that card fun?
The use of that is specifically to see, is that particular game component too strong? So this is something like a Magic designer, if they're trying to balance the card, to not be too strong for tournament play or not be too weak so that nobody's playing the card. Is it still a useful thing?
If you're a Magic the Gathering designer who is listening to our podcast for tips on how to make cards perfectly balanced for tournament play, write that one down. Everyone else, I think you can pretty safely ignore that.
All right, well, this is why I have 6 pages. Let's keep going. Everything is context dependent. If I were to say to you, another Magic example,
That's a good question, AJ. You know it's a trap.
another Magic the Gathering example. If I said, "Is 2 mana destroy an artifact?" Is that good? Is that a good card? Well, there's a million. Idea. Exactly. There's a million things that make the question completely unimportant. There's a lot of YouTube series where they take like a pro from one game, put them in front of cards from another game, like, is this card good? And they get a lot of clicks, but it's completely worthless. Because the question there is, well, what are my other options for destroying artifacts? What is the quality of artifacts my opponents are playing?
What is an artifact?
What is an artifact? How many artifacts could my opponent be playing? I might never see them draw one. What's the opportunity cost of the card that I'm choosing to play here versus other cards? It's just completely useless. And so when you're looking at balancing things, nothing ever exists in a vacuum. Whenever you make a change to one card, there's probably knock-on effects to other cards. And similarly, like you can extrapolate this to everything, where you can raise the value of a card without actually turning any of the knobs on it. You can change the context surrounding the card to make it stronger.
Let's take this out of the TCG territory. Actually, no, one more thing on TCGs. There's a really interesting YouTube video that I recommend, which is what is the value of draw 2 cards? And they go through, I think, like 5 or 10 different TCGs. And every one of these TCGs has a card that just says draw 2 cards. And they compare the cost and the value. And it's just a really interesting breakdown of exactly what you're like. It illustrates what you're saying. Like, draw 2 cards means something completely different in Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh! To Magic the Gathering to Hearthstone. It's just such different systems while all being in the 2-player dueling TCG world.
I'll just interrupt really quickly to say I disagree with their conclusions, but still interesting. Please.
Oh, I don't remember the conclusions. I just remember being like, that's a really interesting, like, everyone has it. It's such a good point of comparison. It's like, what's the basic carb of every culture? You know, rice versus bread versus whatever.
Sure.
So I want to take this out of TCGs because I just don't think that's applicable to most of our audience or me. And I want to talk about how you balance a card in a non-TCG. So let's pretend there's such thing as an average standard game. In your average standard game, you're not going to have these like crazy knock-on effects in every direction. Even something as complicated as Arc Nova, you can still pretty effectively test what a single Arc Nova card does and feels like it is balanced without having to worry about too many other factors. There's obviously like what time of the game you draw it and what else you have it in play and what your zoo looks like, etc. But it's still, I think, a contained enough environment that you can playtest that one card. Something like the AEG game that we keep talking about is much higher complexity, I would say, not in terms of game mechanics, but the situationalness of every card, because we have 6 factions and every card needs to be balanced against every other faction. And we've got another 6 factions coming. So now that the combinations just go crazy. So when we tweak a card in our game, it requires a lot more playtesting. I would argue, I didn't make Arc Nova, but you know, Critic Kitchen is a game with a bunch of systems, but we can pretty confidently test a single card effectively. So if there is a card that you're worried about, put it on top of the deck and play with it. And if there's a situation that you're worried about, set up that situation, put it on top of the deck and play with it. So a lot of the stuff of like how many games are won with this in hand, like if you have that data, sure, great. You probably don't. It's probably not worth gathering. But if you are worried about a particular card, put it on the deck and play with it. And again, it's really less about like, okay, if someone gets a card and that card means, oh, you got that card, you are just going to win, the game is over. That's very boring. And that's almost exclusively the time I care about balance. We were playtesting the Assassin Bug versus the Mantis Sisters yesterday. And we played 2 games in a row. Oh, not yesterday, earlier this week. We played 2 games in a row where I literally not only didn't score a single point of damage, but I also at any point knew where the hidden movement character was at all. So I just wasn't playing the game. And AJ will attest, I got very frustrated and kind of petulant and kind of, stomped my foot and said, this game sucks, I hate you. And then burned down the whole database. But by balancing to that faction, we get some data, and then we're going to run that same faction against someone else and get more data. And so in that very complex, multifaceted environment, changing one card, yeah, that has huge knock-on effects. And the more integrated your game is, the more those knock-on effects are. But unless you are a very experienced designer, your game probably won't have that many knock-on effects. And so it's much easier to test a card in isolation. Would you agree or disagree?
I disagree with something you said a long time ago where you said a lot of our listeners aren't going to be design games where this is relevant. I think a lot of especially new designers start from I want to make better Magic the Gathering. I'm not saying whether or not they should in this conversation, but I think a lot of people are designing those types of games. I've got multiple games that I designed even as an experienced designer that are partially in response to Magic the Gathering card-based dueling games. And whether if you're making a CCG, there's a lot of like moving parts and interactions and stuff. But even if you're not making a game system as open as a CCG, I still think there are a lot of games that have those open systems where there can be a lot of interactions. Definitely, you're right. Our game is an outlier and on the very extreme end. And definitely, I also agree that like most designers aren't needing to worry about every one of these things that I'm saying. Definitely, the majority of designers, I would say, are probably designing something that doesn't require that level of scrutiny for knock-on effects in the system per effect. Because partially because a lot of the effects that you end up designing aren't going to be crazy bananas things. Not everyone out there is Carl Chuduk trying to create things that are doing something insane every turn.
Yeah. I'll tell you, and this is I'm deviating from it slightly just to explore this a little bit more. My system for balancing cards is one of two. One is don't worry about it. I want to have played at least one game with every card. And if there wasn't an apparent problem, it's probably good enough. That's system one. I don't strongly recommend that, especially for new designers. This falls under the unhelpful advice of like, I wait until the game is signed and then I kind of bother starting with balance. And that leads me to two, which was in my early designs, and especially for my signed games, I just play it a bunch. I just play it and play it and play it. And maybe this is all unhelpful advice, but I don't think any amount of data is as valuable as sitting down and playing the game 5 times. And you and I, this AG game, it's our life at the moment. This is why I'm talking about it so much. We are meeting about it multiple times a week for the next several months. We had a bit of a break. We had a 6-month break from it while some contract stuff got negotiated, and I took a break. I took a month off work generally. And we came back to it after 6 months. Is that fair? 4 months?
A little bit less than that. It was like 4, yeah. Something like that.
We came back after a 4-month break. And we could have said, look, we've been playtesting this game for literally 2.5 years now. It's probably good to go. Instead, we said, hey, let's make our top priority. You and I sit down and try every faction. And on my to-do list is to make a list of every faction against every other faction. I don't think we'll get through all of those. But enough that, like, very quickly in those games I was talking about, we were like, oh, Peter's just not doing anything. Literally, he's passing every turn because there is nothing he can do. That's a problem. Right. And that's a big problem. Go ahead.
And to your earlier point, one thing that we did a lot, like pre the break, much earlier in this process, is we went through the content of the game, which cards you could come up with for each faction, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And we'd say, like, what is the worst card for an opposing faction? Like, which one doesn't do anything?
Yes.
Or conversely, which one is the other player terrified that you're going to get? And try and make it so that we balance the cards. Every card's going to have different value against different factions.
Yeah, situational, like we were talking about last episode.
Yeah, but we want them to trim the ceiling and push up the floor so that there's never a card that you get where it's like, oh, this is useless against this faction. Or a card where it's like, I have to dig for this one card. Otherwise,
all I'm doing is stalling until I get this card, then I'm going to win. Like both of those are bad. And so, and this is why I'm interjecting and say, like, the value of assessing individual cards, I think, is not as, I mean, again, if you're a Magic the Gathering designer, cool, but you've probably got a system that is far outside the scope of what we normally talk about. But I think the value is in just playing it and playing it and playing it. And I will, especially with a signed game, and again, this is unhelpful advice, but especially with a signed game, I will just try to get it to the table as much as possible. Because those weird, annoying, overly powerful or underly powerful cards, the outliers, I spot them. And this might be an experience thing, but I really think if you just play your game with an eagle eye out for any card that is not fun in either direction, you will see them and you can tweak them. We've talked about atomic card design in the past, right?
Mm-hmm. Like as small as possible. Yeah. Go ahead.
So for me, atomic card design is every card is completely self-contained. And the interesting thing is when it bounces off other cards. So with the AEG game, again, I'm going to stop apologizing. This is just where my head is at the moment. 90% of my game design time at the moment is on this one game. With the AEG game, we're coming up with new factions, and we pull them in. And I think you were surprised. Maybe I've misremembered and I'm just stroking my own ego here. You're like, this faction just immediately works with the other ones. And that's because we did that work early. we made every card like have an input and an output, and then you can plug any other card onto it, and it all just works straight away. And so, I think with cards, have I told the homebrewers story?
I don't think the one that you're referring to. I've heard a different one, but go for it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've ruined your 6 pages of notes with my ramblings. I was going to have a break and have a coffee and have a Tim Tam. Sorry, an Aussie style Trader's Joe biscuit. So there's a game called Homebrewers by Ben Rossett and Matt O'Malley, who are wonderful designers and close friends of mine. I really like them and I like their stuff. They did Fromage, which is I think my game of the year for last year. I really loved Fromage. And Brewcrafters was my favorite game for a long time. Your friend of mine, Kevin, and I used to play that all the time. We played 50 games, just the two of us. We'd play it, we'd play it again, we'd play it a third time in a night. It was just like the game that we played. Homebrewers is a sequel to that, where you are like brewing beers, but at home, like the craft beer industry or whatever. There is a single card in the deck that said, if a value of a drink goes above a certain amount, then this thing happens. And I can't remember what the thing was. But it was very clear that people keep forgetting this because they changed the actual board itself to have a line at that point so that people would remember it for this one card. And this is like actively offensive to me as a game designer. Don't change your system around one card. Cards should be atomic. Cards should just work. And the more atomic your cards are, I think the easier it is to balance them. Now, obviously, all the combinations are still going to be wild, but compare like a card that adds a whole new phase to the game is a nightmare to balance compared to a card that taps into the existing inputs and outputs.
I'm going to extremely strongly disagree that an atomic card is easier to balance than a complex card. A complex card, you can have all sorts of knobs to tune it.
I think you're using atomic to mean small as possible, and I mean standalone. An atomic card can be very, very complex, but it doesn't change other aspects of the game. It interacts with other aspects of the games rather than changing other aspects of the game.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so let's say there was a card in Settlers of Catan that said, when you play this, you know what actually game did this constantly? It was Talisman. It was more the expansions, I guess, but you'd have an expansion that just added a whole new board and the cards that interacted with that board. It was this whole other like side thing that was happening. So a card in Catan that said, I'm so atomic built that it's hard to say. When this card is played, stop the game and have a voting phase. At the end of the voting phase, draw 2 cards from the agenda deck and play 1. Like it's not interacting with the game as it exists. It's adding a whole new thing.
I understand.
And
yeah.
I think new designers especially do this a lot, whereas Magic the Gathering designers typically don't. If a new thing like that is introduced to Magic the Gathering, it's a big deal, and there's probably a whole set around it. Whereas new designers, I think, will put in a card that's like, oh yeah, this card adds a minigame. It's like, what are you doing? Because that's suddenly really hard to balance, in my opinion. I'm happy to disagree with.
I understand what you're saying, though. And you know what's interesting is the more time goes on, the more I've been attracted to games that pull off the atomic design really well. Tsukiyumi or Inish are both games where it's like,
yes,
you have a card, it's just do all the things it says, move on. Yeah. And yes, I think that they both do it very well.
And all those things are inputting to existing game systems.
Yes.
In the second set of our game, we're introducing a new thing, Toxic. And for a draft, Toxic existed on 1 card in my entire factions deck. And it was fine. But you were like, hey, what if it was one of the core things of the deck? I was like, yes. It's like the Daniel Locke Games quote, your game should either do none of the thing or a lot of a thing.
Right.
Like, Toxic being just on 1 card, it felt clunky. And as soon as you as soon as you said another place to go, I leapt onto that because I was like, okay, now it's not this 1 card has its whole system. Is that I think that's a really good example. Not helpful to listeners, but maybe for you to like that's what I mean by an atomic card. It plays with the existing systems. In this case, Toxic is now being introduced as a system, but it's for the whole faction, not just for that 1 card. So yeah. I think that in terms of balancing cards, the more atomic they are, the easier they are to balance. You disagreed with that earlier. Are you on board now?
Yeah, I agree with you. It is definitely easier to balance because you don't have to worry about synergies or knock-on effects and those sorts of things.
Yeah, sure. You still do because you can combo cards, but in a controlled way, in a API way, to use an old tech term. And so and that's what I mean when I say like most games, A, aim for your cards to be atomic, and B, again, I'm pretending there's such thing as an average game. In an average game, the board state is generally like the extremes are pretty limited. You're either going to be very early and there's not much on the board, or very late there's a lot of stuff on the board, and you can test that card at those two extremes and once in the middle to be safe, and you're probably fine in most games.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the simpler your game is, the easier it is to test, I think, honestly. Which sounds tautological, but you know what I mean. Okay, my interjection is done, AJ. Please continue.
All right, we've done 2 bullet points in 20 minutes. Balancing for player skill. So this is something where if you have a character, faction, etc., and you want the power budget to be a certain amount, if it's harder to play, does it need to become more powerful to compensate for the extra difficulty? My opinion, the way that you should balance that is for top-end play. If someone's playing the faction well, they should be at equal power level. If you don't do that, you can run into problems.
It's so directly relevant to our recent playtests.
Yeah. Believe it or not, these are all notes that I wrote ages ago.
That's funny.
I really collected notes from years ago that I've just adding together. That's why I've got 6 pages, because I just never checked my notes. I was just like, here's a thought balance. Here's a thought balance. Here's a thought balance.
A slight counterpoint to this one, this is something we struggle with, is that if a faction is very, very difficult to play, I think it needs to be slightly above the power curve.
See, I disagree, but the way that I like it handled is just you label it. If you say this faction is difficult to play, if you want to get the same amount of power out of it as an easy to play faction, okay, it's going to take more work. But if you
I think it needs to be even just like an iota above, because if it's like, hey, this one, it plays itself, and this one is really hard to play and this is powerful, why would anyone ever play the hard to play one? There's no point.
You would, because it's variety. This is for the first play versus the 10th play, right? If you play the game 10 times and you're like, okay, I understand how to play all characters optimally now. Well, if the hard one is just better, then no one's ever playing the starter ones. It's sort of the opposite problem. Whereas if you want to learn the harder to play one, you can still get to the same point where everybody else is. It just requires more skill. And I think
maybe we're using hard in different ways. I mean, I don't want to use the word finicky, but if you have a faction where every turn you do 1 damage, and a faction where every turn, if you can correctly sequence 5 things, you do 1 damage, there is just no point in playing the second one.
Right.
It's harder to play for the exact same value. Not worth it. I don't think anyone would, even for variety.
Yep.
I think it needs to be 1.2 damage at best, you know?
Yeah. If something's... Yeah, I agree with that in principle. I just don't want factions to fall off as players get skilled at the game. And the important thing to me is making sure that they're clearly labeled. Neuroshima Hex did not do this. And people wrote in being like, this faction's so weak. And it's like, no, you just have to get good. You know?
This actually brings directly to a thing, which is player feedback is not useless, but every single game I've ever seen with multiple factions has someone arguing that this is the most powerful and is unbreakably good, and someone arguing that exact same faction is way too weak and unbreakably bad. I don't want to say dismiss all feedback or anything like that, but it's really tricky to pass any kind of feedback for something unbalanced, because people just have different opinions, and people really, really believe their opinions. That's why it's their opinion. And so that can be an incredibly difficult space to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Really minor tip when trying to balance RNG. This is the most art, not science. Just, again, consider the opportunity cost of doing something where they don't know the outcome. Is this input versus output randomness that you have to deal with? What's the potential high-end, low-end, average, median? Just think about those
lucky cards that I was talking about are a really good example of that.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anything special you can do for those kinds of things. You just have to either test them a bunch or consider it.
I think balance is such a dead word to me. I think the more important consideration there is it fun, or what experience are you going for, and does it match that experience?
So when I'm using balancing RNG here, what I mean is to whichever goal you're currently working towards. At the start of this, we established different goals. Whatever goal you're working towards, however you want this effect tuned, this is how you look at RNG to be able to tune it to that goal. That's how I'm trying to frame this.
Right, but I think what I'm saying is that every turn this card does does 1 damage to half the time this card does 2 damage. mathematically those are identical. So why do one or the other? I think that's when you have to step into like you can't solve that from the points that you're saying. There you have to go like, okay, what am I trying to do here?
Pardon?
So it's very easy to get to a situation where two options are identically balanced.
Sure.
But you still have to make that choice of which option to go with.
I'm just saying if you're trying to decide if you want this particular effect to be stronger, more consistent, whatever, if you're trying to adjust the power level of this effect, then those are the things that you can consider when looking at a randomized effect.
Gotcha.
Compare hard numbers when possible and convert things into hard numbers when possible.
This is similar to Daniel the Games point. Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know if I've gone there yet, actually. I still haven't finished the blog. So I'll give the example of the anglerfish, my favorite whipping boy for balance. And baby Peter's too. So the anglerfish is ridiculously overpowered, in my opinion, in Aquatica. In Aquatica, basically you can have cards and effects that get you resources, and you can have actions where you get to use those resources. Very vague, but basically you spend resources to buy things. The anglerfish allows you to get a card that has been discarded, which just naturally happens over the course of play, and if you want to, you can sort of manipulate the game in certain ways to be able to make cards discarded if you want to get a specific one discarded. So it lets you have the opportunity to buy something, and you take something from the discard pile for free and get. So you get the opportunity of getting the card, but also you don't have to pay any resources. A pretty good starting card is like you get to buy a thing and get about 3 resources. So this card can effectively say, buy a card and get 9 resources because you could buy the most expensive one. So if you just convert simply the opportunity cost, even that taking a card from the discard is a completely different effect on paper to buying a card by paying resources, you can convert to like what the top end could be if you're utilizing the card efficiently. Does that make sense?
Yes. I found the Daniel the Games quote. It was, a good designer balances by changing numbers, a bad designer adds text, rules, and caveats. So not exactly what you're talking about, but that's what I was thinking of.
Cool. For incomparables, for things where it's not, you can't do that sort of 1-to-1 ratio, I don't have any answer other than just playtesting and vibes. I think the assassin bug's the best example in our game system. In that game, if the opponent moves on to your space, they're playing the hidden movement game, they take a damage and you teleport, and that's a lot of like their attack economy, and they only have 3 HP, where a lot of other factions have a lot more HP, can shield to defend themselves from damage, and spawn troops that absorb hits for them. So like, how can you possibly compare the HP to one and the attack power of another? For that one, you just can't. I don't have any shortcut to try and approximate things. Just go with your gut, playtest it,
play it.
Yeah.
The best advice I can give for balancing is have a co-designer, because then you have 2 people of like roughly comparable skill who are just happy to play it again and again and again and again.
Seriously, like with our game with AAG, my goodness, is it so much easier when just Peter and I are playtesting back and forth, because we know that we're both playing well. Like, give Peter any faction, he's going to play it well. I know the data that I'm getting is going to be solid. If Peter says something is not working, I understand it is not working. I don't have to stop and say, well, how good is Peter? Did he make some mistakes there? Blah, blah, blah. Especially because not all information is open information. I don't necessarily know if he did make a mistake.
Just sleep on that too. One thing that we do that I really recommend for designers is when you are playtesting for balance, talk through your move, even if it gives away information. I don't care about that. And undo and redo. Like, it's very easy to get locked into this, like, no, we're playing a game, you can't reverse a turn. AJ and I would say on average once a game, we'll just be like, cool, let's just go back to this state and keep going from there to see if I'd made this choice. Because then you can literally like get the data of, was it this choice that lost me the game, or is this card just annoying to play against?
Especially if someone makes a dumb mistake, as in like something that's on board. There was one time in our last game where you were like, all right, so you're here, 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 or here. But there's actually one other possibility that I could have been, and rather than just being like, "Oh, he didn't know,"
it's not useful data for me to make a dumb mistake.
Yeah.
I also really strongly recommend, like, I play test a lot of games, as you can imagine, and players are always like, "Oh man, that was a really dumb turn. Can I just undo that?" I'll be like, yes. Like, I'm not testing how perfectly you can play turn 1 of my complex 3-hour Euro. I'm testing like what it's like to play. And so if on the first turn you took in this game, it was like a fire element instead of a gold, yeah, go back and take a gold. Like, I don't. It doesn't. The other
Hmm.
players aren't going to be like, well, hang on, I got serious money on this game. Like, let everyone play fake efficiently. Let everyone play to an artificial maximum level of play, because then you're just getting better data.
Which also you should probably just do generally. If someone's like, "Oh, I made a dumb move. Can I take that back?" If it doesn't really matter, like there's no money on the game, it doesn't really change the strategy that you've done since then. Just don't do it. Here's.
Yeah. My last ever game of 18, what's the big one? 1825. It was an 8-hour game, and 4 hours in, I made a really dumb mistake. And the other players, like a round later, I realized it was way too late to undo it. And other players had made their plans around that. So I sat there for 4 hours knowing I'd lost from that point on. And I've not played an 18xx game since then.
Why not, Peter?
Because that was a very unfun experience. And no one's fault. And I couldn't just drop out. And we played that game a lot. We played a lot.
All right, here's a little cheat. Let players balance the game themselves. Have an auction. Have a rolling market where the one that's been in the market for the longest costs one, the second longest costs two, et cetera, et cetera. So then if someone sees a card and they're like, oh, it's really good, cool, it's actually fun that it's imbalanced and that it's stronger, because now they're like, but is it 3 times as much money stronger, or does someone else value it that much? Is someone else going to buy this card and make it cheaper? There's drafting cards where, of course, players can prioritize the cards. If they think it's broken, go ahead and take it. It was funny. I was playtesting a drafting game with someone, and at the end of the game, he was like, his feedback was, well, I mean, this card is so strong. I mean, and I ended up with like 2 or 3 like really busted cards this game. So, I mean, if you want your game to come down to RNG, that's fine. It's like, hold on, you end up with 2 really good cards, and it's a draft. Definitionally, like, it was not RNG that you ended up with both of those cards.
I went through my every month. At the start of every month, I just go through my BGG reviews to see what people have said. And someone reviewed Critic Kitchen as this game would be better if you just rolled dice where you place because it's so random. And I was like, oh boy, oh boy,
for a worker placement game.
Yeah, it was something.
I guess to minor credit, this actually comes up a little bit later, but there can be like a feeling of helplessness with or like arbitrariness when you're doing simultaneous actions, where it feels like, well, if you do this, I do this, that kind of thing.
Auctions, now that we're diving into it, auctions also have a really high entry, like a really challenging entry point. You need to understand the value of so much of the game to be able to effectively auction. There's a Stevenson brother.
Either way.
Yes. But especially there. But even without that, there's a Stevenson's, David and Daniel Stevenson's made a game called Empires, which I did some light development on. And it's all auctions. It's nothing but auctions from start to finish. And the market bounced off that game hard because it's just so hard to value what an auction is. And like you were saying, you lose the money even if you don't win the auction.
Mm-hmm. Another way you can get players to balance for you is kingmaking. If you have targeted aggression in your game or other such mechanics, if there's blocking even in Euro games, then you can have players gang up on the leader and that sort of thing, which is a form of balance if you care more about like balance from like the headwind sense or tailwind sense.
Yeah, this overlaps with our episode about different catch-up mechanisms.
Yeah, I think the key, if you want to sort of rely on this a little bit and make it like a social political dynamic to the game, then the key is to make sure that players have strong directional heuristics, meaning they understand the position of the players and how close they are to victory. I think Twad Imperium is just the best example for this, because if you see like a ton of ships on the table, you're like, wow, that's pretty powerful. But I can see you have 2 victory points out of 10. So you're not really a threat because you can only get 1 or 2 around.
Yeah.
Whereas you can clearly see if someone's got 9 victory points, okay, that is the person we have to team up against. I think
regardless of what their board state looks like, they are about to win.
Exactly. And conversely, Root does still have victory point tracks, but what each faction is doing is so opaque, it's very hard to be able to internalize if I'm supposed to team up on them or not. So while that works well if you're experienced at the game, if you're new to the game, I didn't find that it was actually a very useful balancing mechanism.
Yeah, I think the trend you're saying is if you're relying on the players to balance the game, they need to understand the game, so it's not a great entry point for balance.
For sure.
Do the work, basically.
Handicaps. Handicaps are interesting. I think, generally speaking, they're quite distasteful. I think they like introduce like a feel bad, but I don't think that they're useless. I just think that they're inelegant, if that's fair. And handicaps, the more traditional sense is what we talked about recently, so I'm not going to rehash them too much. Catch-ups, headwinds, things that are like subtle, giving people the opportunity to shoot the moon, hidden scoring, which doesn't, again, affect balance, but does affect perception of positioning, stuff like that. But I think more raw handicaps, where it's like you just straight up get something to start, do have a time and place in games that are tough to get other players into. I gotta tell you, like, if I'm...
We talked about that time you killed me handicap system in the catch-up episode, I think. Did we?
I don't remember that one, but maybe we did. Go again. If I forgot, someone else forgot.
We might have talked about it. We hang out so much these days.
I think we talked about it off air, where you
really?
you have extra pawns. Maybe we did talk about it on there. I don't know. But you have extra.
You start
people,
with fewer pawns if you are better at the game, and that when you said like games that are hard to get other people into, I was like, oh, he's talking about, not intentionally, but you are 100% talking about that game. I know so many people own a copy, and they're like, I just want to play it with someone, and no one will play it because it's so like grueling in a good way. I don't know. It's a weird way to sell a game.
But for you, if you were trying to play it with someone who was weak at games or that type of game or whatever, it's an interesting challenge for you, because now you have to play around.
It was off camera because it was when we were talking about coming up with a handicap system for our AEG game. I was driving.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, so let me briefly explain it. In that time you killed me, you can teleport back in time and replace the pawn that just went back in time. It's like a time travel joke, basically. And you start with 5 off the board each, and the handicap system is just starting with 4, 3, 2. You start with 4 off the board, and the handicap system is starting with 3, 2, or 1. So like the Grandmaster level is starting with 1. And I was saying to AJ on the call, you've either never played or played once, if I recall correctly.
I played a couple times.
Yeah, you've played a couple of times. I've played it infinite times because I designed that game over 2 years and playtested it forever. If AJ started with 4 off the board and I started with 1, I think it would be a close match. And that's really compelling. A, it's such a simple handicap system. And B, I think that's just really compelling. I did some quick Googling, and I was worried that handicap was considered an ableist term. It seems that handicap in the way that we're using it actually predates the alternate term for disabled. And so handicap to refer to people with a disability is now being phased out, but it's being kept as or at least there's no replacement term for the way we're using it, in case you're worried about that at all.
I appreciate you bringing it up.
If anyone in the comments knows that I'm wrong about this, please let me know, because I couldn't find any replacement term. So I think this is just the current term.
Cool. Co-op and solo. So solo is interesting in that oftentimes they just end up being a score attack, and it's simply, you play and you see what like people who are weak at the game get, what people who are strong at the game get. You make the numbers accordingly. For adjusting for cooperative games or non-score based solo games, I think one way to frame the difficulty mode is thinking about the people who are playing them. So if you have an easy mode, think either the entire group or at least one person in the group is not in your target demographic. This is a family who is playing with a little kid. The little kid isn't the person that you're designing the game for, but it's a co-op game. They're going to play it with people who are less into the games. So make it easy enough that player can play it, have a good shot of winning it, and be able to understand what's going on. If you're playing on like a normal difficulty mode, I would say target hobby gamers having a slightly easy time with it. I think for a hobby gamer, if they have a slightly easy time with it, like something like Pandemic Normal Mode, then a casual gamer would find it slightly hard, or maybe even a little bit more than slightly hard. And I think that's a good level for a normal one, because then the casual gamers have something to aspire to. The hobby gamers feel smart and jump ahead to the advanced modes,
And this is just a recommendation, not a solved issue by any means.
Yes.
You can find debates everywhere of like, how many times should you win a cooperative game? Yeah. So these are soft recommendations, not the rules.
By all means. But because everything else we say is hard rules that have no exception. For other difficulty modes, I'm curious what you think about this. Yeah. I think about this kind of thing a lot because I really like very challenging co-op modes. And I find, again, this is very much just my taste, but there's the type of difficulty mode that just simply says you can make fewer mistakes. I don't find that necessarily super compelling. There's ones that cut your ability to play the game. I really do not like those. And then there's ones that layer on challenge in in terms of just scale, there's more challenges to do. But my favorite one is different ways to do it. So I'll use Pandemic in 3 different ways to show these examples. Base Pandemic, if you go up a difficulty, you just add a epidemic card. That's totally fine. It can mess with the pacing a little bit, which I don't love.
Is this that little track on the board that you start with? Like you start at a different spot on that track?
No, you start the same spot, but the epidemic cards are what increases that and pulls out a card from the bottom and puts 3 on it.
I haven't played it in years. I have a half memory of like there being the thing where I was like, what's that for? Oh, it must be for higher difficulty.
Yeah, so you remember at the start of the game, you divide the deck into X piles and then shuffle in 1 epidemic card that's really bad into them. For base Pandemic, you just add more of those.
Gotcha.
So again, totally fine. It messes a little bit with the pacing. I'd prefer if it didn't do that, but that's good. Pandemic Legacy cuts the fun cards, but that's partially because it's a meta progression thing. Right. So in Pandemic Legacy, if you succeed, you get less funding, you get less of these cool cards, and that just keeps going. I do not like this approach because it means that I don't get to play with the cool toys. When I play on a higher difficulty, I want to get to use the cool toys because I can use them in extra creative ways that weak players can't do. I don't want to lose those.
There's a quote I think about all the time. I've probably mentioned on the show before. The better you are at golf, the less golf you have to play.
Sure. And then there's Pandemic on the Brink, which is an expansion for Pandemic. And what it does is it replaces epidemic cards with super duper epidemic cards that have extra challenging effects to go with. And for me, that's the best solution in this one because it makes the game much more interesting and in a different way for the advanced players, in a way that other players would hate. They would not want to have to deal with these weird restrictions and extra punishing mechanics. But as an experienced player, I still get to use all the core tools of Pandemic just to solve different, more complex problems.
I'm a big difficulty level fan. I think it's a really interesting thing that you can do to adjust it. You say co-op. I'm going to talk solo because that's sort of where I live. Sure. Although I guess French Toast is a cooperative version, and there's just 2 decks. There's the basic deck and the advanced deck. That advanced deck exists purely because Carla Ferguson of Weird Giraffe Games got so good at the game that she could get any card, even not knowing what the card is, in like less than 1 round. She like worked out a way. So I just added cards that were just like way more difficult for that exact play. I'm very glad I did. I'm going to talk about Balatro. This will shock you. Balatro has, I think it's 8 stakes per deck, and it goes from white stake to blah, 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 all the way up to gold stake. And each one of them just adds an extra rule. And so the first rule is the first hand of each round doesn't score you any money. The top one is some jokers cost you $3 per round to keep. And so it's just each one layers a new rule on. And I think that's an amazing, again, Balatro is my baby at the moment. I love it. Swooches for Balatro. And I think that kind of system is great. I haven't played enough of it, but I believe Spirit Island does something very similar where there's like different invader decks who are like the people who are thematically coming to colonize the island. And you can increase each of these decks by different difficulties. Sentinels Multiverse, I know, had a basic and an advanced mode for each villain, and it had a lot of villains of various difficulties. That one, I think they just kind of trusted the players would be good, and so they just didn't bother testing a lot of the advanced ones. So people would come out and be like, "Yeah, this advanced deck is actually impossible. Don't do that." Is my advice. But I think any sort of what you're saying with like the super pandemic cards, anytime you can make the game more challenging in an interesting way, that's always the direction. I'm very content driven, so that's what I want to do. It does mean it's harder to playtest. Balatro has one of the stakes is the blue stake, and it just cuts 1 discard per hand. There's an update coming soon. He's like, I'm redoing blue stake because it's just not that interesting. It's more challenging, sure, but it limits the different things that you can do. You just can't do a straight flush build anymore. It's just impossible. You don't have the discards for it. So it's like, yeah, I'm just going to switch that up to something else. And the game as a whole will probably become easier because every stake layers on top of the others. So everything blue stake and above will just be easier, but it'll be more fun. And so this again sounds like stupid advice. If you can make it more fun, do that. Like super epidemics. My solo game that I just announced was signed with Smoke and Dagger. That's got these challenge cards that once you've unlocked everything in the roguelike, you start introducing these challenge cards, and they're just a rule that you have to play around, and it just makes you play in such a weird, interesting way. So yeah, anything like that, I'm a huge fan of. Yeah,
I dig it. Turn order. This is one I'm pulling straight from Daniel.games. You want to deal with this organically if possible. Saying the first player also gets this, it's fine. You can do it, but it's pretty inorganic and inelegant. I really like the example that Daniel gave where he talked about Scrabble, where like you can go first.
Just to be clear, you're talking about some games have a first player advantage, some games have a last player advantage. How do you balance around it's better to go last in this game, it's better to go first in this game?
Yes, thank you. So in Scrabble, they organically do it by where they position the bonuses. So if you go turn 1, okay, you're not going to have access to all the best bonuses, and you may end up setting up the opponent to do the same. I've got a sports game, very simple. You have one player going first. That's an advantage. You get 1 extra turn. The opposing team starts with the ball. The ball had to start somewhere. It's not an extra rule for me to say that they start with it. It's just a nice organic way of rolling that out.
I think we disagree on like the inelegance of just starting with resources. I think it's annoying if you have to consult a table. If it's like, okay, first player gets a wood, second player gets a wood and 2 stone, third player gets no stone but a gold. Like, I think that's fiddly and annoying. I have a game working title is Fairy Garden, and the first player starts with 1 coin, second with 2, third with 3, fourth with 4, fifth with 5. And I just think that's so like, I think that's very, very elegant. And if there even is one, then like it solves the first player advantage. Because of what you said, like you get 1 extra turn, cool. Well, the second player gets an extra coin, and it scales 1 to 1. I think that kind of thing. I actually find that very elegant. I realize it's my design, but anytime a game does that, where it's just like, what is your turn in the play count? Cool, you get that many extra things, done. Like that doesn't offend me in the slightest. And as you know, I'm anti setup rules, but that kind of thing, I'm like, yep, cool, done. Tiny Folk Cafe, my little worker placement game. First player starts with 1 coffee bean. Second player starts with 2. Third, like same thing. I think something like that is absolutely fine. Do you have more first player things? Because I got a few that I know of.
I do not, because to be honest, I don't really care about first player advantage very much.
A lot of abstract games will do. That time he killed me. I think you just start in a different era to the other player, so that is like they're not balanced. Like past is not as good as future or whatever. Which it's been so long since I played that game, I can't even remember. But 1 player starts in the past, 1 player starts in the future, and that kind of balances itself. But what a lot of abstract games do, and our AEG games almost does, is the first player just gets 1 fewer action. If you've got a 2-action game, first player starts with 1 action, and then it's 2-2-2 for the rest of the game. And that's a very common, very simple abstract balancing rule. The most interesting abstract balancing rule is if there's like a blank board and position matters, the first player chooses a position. The other player then either plays as that and goes second, or lets them play as that and go first. So like it's sort of like completely it's like a bid. It's such a weird, interesting one. And then the best solution, of course, is when there is an advantage to going first, but also an advantage to going last. So we have a Keymaster in the process of signing my book Area Control game. We've talked about it in the Soul Sheet episode before, Mighty Than the Sword. And in that one, going last, it's an area control game. So going last garners a huge advantage. But we have absolutely nothing because going first gets you first access to some stuff. So it sort of balances that way. I can think of a bunch of others where like there is I guess what I'm saying is if there is a last player advantage, make it good to go first for some reason. If there's a first player advantage, make it good to go last for some reason. Mechanically, like in the structure of your rules, ideally rather than arbitrarily handing out whatever.
For sure. I want to zoom in on mana curves because I do believe our designers are designing their own little card games and CCGs and stuff like that. So I just want to briefly talk about a few points to, again, the whole point of this one is just to get you thinking about these things in different ways. So the more expensive a card is, again, we'll just use Magic as a simple example here. The more expensive a card is, the less flexible it is because you can't play in conjunction with other cards. If you have 2-3 cost cards, you can play either one of them on turn 3, or you can play both of them on turn 6 or anywhere in between. A 6 cost card, you have to wait until turn 6, and it takes up your whole turn 6.
Unless you have a bunch of Black Lotuses.
Very true. So it's a much clunkier tool, and it has to be worth it, especially because in something like Magic, your resources aren't guaranteed. You might not have 6 lands by turn 6, and the game might even be over by turn 6. Maybe your opponent ran you over. So
who's the Frontier gentleman we were talking about last episode?
Frontier gentleman.
He had a curve that was a Frontier.
Oh, Pareto.
Pareto, yeah. So Pareto, in your example for that, you said like a 1/1 costs 1 and a 10/10 costs 10. And I think in almost any game with mana, it wouldn't be that because 10 is so expensive that it would be a 1 cost 1/1, maybe a 2/3 cost 2, and then like it scales in this really interesting way, I think, with most mana games.
Right, and that's what I want to talk about with this point is just the way that you have to think about scaling these effects. So in Magic, because your mana isn't guaranteed, because the games don't always go that late, because of all these different things, the high cost cards have to be exponentially powerful. They have to be insane when they start costing 6+ mana. And
they're taking up space in your hand, yeah.
Yes. But if you look at something like Hearthstone, in Hearthstone, you get a mana every single turn. It is guaranteed. So it actually has a different power curve. And because it's guaranteed every turn, that makes the higher cost cards much more important. And it actually means that the 1 cost cards, the biggest cost to them is the opportunity cost. Because you can get up to 10 mana in Hearthstone and then have that for like 20 turns. 1 mana is like nothing in it. And so normally you'd think, well, you should get nothing for it because you're spending so little resources. The mana isn't the cost on the 1 drop. It's the opportunity cost. It's the card itself. Right. So the 1 drops in Hearthstone actually have to be really pushed. If you compare like a 1 drop in Hearthstone to a 1 drop in Magic, it's night and day because in Magic...
What 1 drop being a card that costs 1 mana, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mana is a much less important resource in...
because it's consistent.
Yes.
As what a lot of tabletop games do to sort of simulate this, sorry, not that Magic isn't a tabletop game. What a lot of hobby, you know what I mean, like boxed games do, is they will split the deck into 3. Maybe this is an older thing. I don't see it as much anymore. But you'll see a lot of games be like, okay, once you finish the level 1 deck, then you start drawing from level 2 deck. Once you finish level 2 decks, you start drawing from level 3 deck. And it's a way to almost like, I guess, artificially solve this problem. It means a lot of sorting at the end of the game, which is, I think, is why you don't see it as much. But it definitely means that, like, on your you're not going to draw turn 1 a thing that you just literally can't afford because it's impossible. Instead, you're going to get through that deck and then start drawing level 2 and then start drawing level 3.
Yeah, as another point of comparison, Wingspan versus It's a Wonderful World. I'm not here to disparage Wingspan much, but in Wingspan...
That was my game of the year the year it came out.
I know, listen, it's very, very popular. Again, not here to disparage it much. But I do think one thing that's an interesting point of comparison from Wingspan to It's a Wonderful World, which are very different games, but are both at their core card-based engine-building games,
right?
Is that
big deck of cards games, I call them.
Yeah. In Wingspan, you could see like 4 end-of-game VP cards come up right away. And it's like, well, I don't really want any of those ones. And it does have release the levers and all sorts of things. But if you look at one of those cards in Wingspan, its value is so low at the beginning versus an engine building card is so valuable at the beginning because you'll have it every single turn of the game. In It's a Wonderful World, that's a really interesting game. And again, completely different games. Try and bear in mind that the point comparison here is the engine building versus point getting structure of these decks.
The tempo.
Yeah. It's a Wonderful World is just a 4-round drafting game. But in that game, turn 1, you may very well take a card that is only endgame scoring that you're not going to use until the very end of the game. Why? Because those cards are very rare. You might not see another one, and it doesn't have one of those graduated decks. And you might even hate draft those from your opponent seeing that it's there because any card can be cashed in for a basic resource. And so, again, I'm not saying one's better than the other. That's not what I'm trying to say. Just it's something to consider. The stage of the game, the value of the card. Are there ways to make cards more valuable at different stages of the game? Something to consider. But I do think it's also interesting the way that Wingspan has it because knowing that sort of, in Magic the Gathering, call it turning the corner, knowing when you're like, oh, I want to pivot from engine building to those points gain, or in Dominion is probably a better example, when you want to start buying those victory point cards, that's a really interesting decision that's organic and is dictated by the pace of other players and the tempo of that particular game.
For sure.
So just going back to mana curves and everything like that, one interesting thing is thinking about the sort of riders. We were talking about before about tags, creature types, those sorts of things.
Screen riders, authors, all kinds of riders.
Like creature tags like Goblin or Dragon or whatever onto a card. Or even just adding an ability like First Strike you hit before your opponent does. Those types of effects generally speaking, have an outsized effect on cheaper cards because it's affecting the overall power budget of the card so much more. First Strike may be a poor example because it scales off the attack points of the card. But think of it this way. If you add, like, let's say +1 health to a 1-cost creature, you've often just doubled its health. If you had +1 HP to a 6-drop, you've increased it by 1/6. The same thing's true for a lot of abilities where the value you get
from
it.
Is a 6-drop the mana cost or the
mana cost? Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
6 cost.
You said adding 1 health to a 6-drop makes it 1/6 as good, and I was confused by the use of 6
better. Sorry, 1/6 better is what I meant to say.
But I'm saying that, like, a 6-drop doesn't necessarily have 6 health, does it?
No.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, just a quick point of comparison. The sort of standard curve for Magic cards is attack and defense equal to its power for quick estimation stuff. So just consider how much of the power budget of the card is coming from that effect, and is it outsized because of the cost of it? Would that small rider be a huge rider on a cheap card versus a really tiny rider on a more expensive card?
I'll tell you a thing to avoid that I've seen many new designers do. Let's say you have a card in the game that if you draw it, you just win. Let's say we're playing Magic. Someone's found this broken card and put it in their deck. This is the argument that I disagree with. Yeah, but they don't always draw it. Like, that's not a compelling argument to me.
Yeah, tell that to the person who plays against it when they do draw it.
Yeah.
Did they have a good time?
and this is why earlier I was saying, like, force those annoying situations, because they probably won't draw it. I just don't think it's a reasonable defense. See what happens when they do, rather than playing it 10 times being like, they never drew it, it's not a problem. Like, that just doesn't statistically make sense.
Yeah, it's not very likely to roll the skull in Dead of Winter twice on your first turn and have both your characters die. That happened to my friend. He did not have a good time.
Yeah.
So we're sort of rounding the end here. Perfect balance is impossible. Imbalance is fun. I have one thing that I is very niche topic that I had no advice on. I'm curious if you have any. Team-based games. I mean, obviously there's like some sort of self-selection bias where it's like, oh, I know I'm good at word games, so maybe I'll split myself up from my wife who's good at word games when we play Codenames or something like that.
My Australian friends and I are not allowed to play like games like Monikers on the same team because we just have a whole decrypto. We have a whole language that is just impossible to decipher.
Do you have any thoughts on balancing team games? Any ideas?
I don't understand the question. Can you, like, are you talking about like decrypto or something like that?
Yeah, sure. Let's take decrypto as an example. Do you have any advice for, as a game designer, to help create a balanced play experience where both teams feel like they have reasonably equal chances of victory? Let's look at through that specific lens.
Yeah, I think that does fall on the players. Like,
yeah. I think so.
You and I are both very, very, very good at our AEG game. If we had a 2v2 mode and we would play testing, we wouldn't be on the same team because it would just be a slaughter. Like, no matter who in the world we were against, you and me in a team are going to be pretty close to unstoppable. So it's
like
just up to the
contract
players.
thing.
Yeah. It's a social contract, exactly. It's a golden circle. I want to talk about balance a little bit. I have a few thoughts that I came up with, and also I was finding that Daniel.games quote, I found the whole section on balance, so I want to quote him a few times too. Actually, I'll start with his quote, and then I'll talk about how it directly relates to me. Oh crap, I can't find it now.
How embarrassing. And we're not going to let this out. Everyone knows that here's a fool who doesn't know how to keep his tabs in order.
People drastically overestimate the importance of balance. It's nice that things are balanced, but plenty of other things are more important.
Yep.
Balance is also very easy to achieve. Almost anything can be balanced, which means really do whatever you like and just balance it all later. I know some... Here, this is the one I was thinking of. I know some cards I make are imbalanced, too strong or too weak. That's fine. It just happened that the simple, clean version of the card was imbalanced. Choose elegance over balance. As long as the card has some value and doesn't feel bad for anyone, I'm happy with it. And this is what I meant when I said, like, a spreadsheet saying how many times the card was played in hand. Like, I just don't care. Like, I care about what it feels like when it hits the table. I care about if you are guaranteed to win every time you draw it. Sure, that's obviously a problem. But like 90% of the time, if a card is stronger than it should be, it's actually fine. And he talks a little bit about how if you're drawing a bunch of stuff, then yeah, you're probably going to get one or two that are strong above the curve, but you also get one or two that are below the curve, and your opponent will get it. Like, theoretically, and I guess this is similar to the rolling a skull twice on the first turn. Like, it can happen, and I'm countering my own. Like, what if they don't draw it? I'm saying, like, if you have one card that's a guaranteed win, that's a huge problem. If you have 5 cards that are even 1.5 times as powerful as the others, someone has to draw all of them and no one else draw any of them. And if you're drawing enough cards and cycling the deck for it to really be a problem, like I'm more concerned with cards that are like consistent use. So in our game, the Assassin Bug, you play a card and then you get back in your hand, you play it again, you get it back, play it again. That's something I'm much more concerned about than the Butterfly, which is you have some of the caterpillars are just way better than the others. These give you powers in the game. But once it's dead, you don't have it again for the rest of the game. So if I play the really powerful caterpillar, unless it's guaranteed to win me the game, that's a problem. But if I play the really powerful one, cool, just target it, and now it's gone. And the strong part of my engine is gone.
You know what's funny is in my notes for that exact quote from Daniel.Games, I literally say, I vastly care more about play patterns than balance, which is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
I do have one more point that I thought of, actually, if I can
go for it.
When I was talking about RNG earlier, I said, consider the highs, lows, average, etc. One thing you can do for RNG is the more RNG you have, the more it averages out. So if you have one very consequential die roll in your game, that's going to suck when it fails. If you roll 50 dice over the course of the game, you're going to miss some of those important die rolls. But if you roll 50 dice, it every time you add an extra die, it increases the bell curve average. So it's more likely that you'll hit in the middle of that. So the more dice you roll, the more random effects you have within that sort of framework, the more it is actually going to even out and be balanced, and the less you're going to have these spiky outlier events.
Yeah, I think a really good example of why balance isn't the be-all and end-all, which was never your point, I'm not trying to say that was, is that a D6 is so incredibly unbalanced. Yep. Like, it is, the best result is 6 times better than the weakest result, and yet it is one of the most common. Now, obviously, games will mitigate and stuff like that, but generally speaking, a D6 is crazy balanced and really fun to roll. I want to quote Daniel.Games again. In simpler, more fun-based games, imbalance can add excitement. It might not seem like a good idea for some things to be clearly better than others, but when you get them, it's exciting. And that's what I was talking about with the with the push your luck kind of example. Like, yeah, if what you're doing is building a game around the unknown result of what you do, they can't be bad. Like, you've hoisted by your own petard. Okay, last one from Daniel.Games is
I'm going to jump in just to build off of something you said there very briefly. Just to reiterate, yes, I agree. Balance is the most important thing. There's a reason why our 55th episode is when we start talking about balance. Carry on.
Yeah, please make this your 55th priority. Not even kidding. Last Daniel.Games, and I have an anecdote. If there are 2 options and one is chosen only 25% of the time, that's still fine. And this leads into some of your points about situational and that kind of stuff. But like, you don't need everything to be equally balanced. We talked a little bit about different victory paths, and then we didn't necessarily come back to it. This is one where I think the balance is important, weirdly, because if you hear the end of the thought, and I think you'll agree. Okay. If you have 3 different paths to victory in your game, and one wins more than the others, I think, what's the point in having the other 2?
What about Shoot the Moon?
Let's say Shoot the Moon wins 1/10 as much as the others, but you also go for it like 1/10 of the time. I think that's fine.
Cool.
I'm saying that the story I'm going to tell is a friend of mine. I won't name them. I've probably told this story before. They had 3 paths to victory, and one of them was building out your tableau. One of them was like collecting money and selling things at a market, and the other one was like an area control game. And 2 turns in, I was looking at the various victory points. I was like, oh, the area control game is worth literally twice as much as the others. It was not even close. And so I started going for the one that was worth twice as much, and I was bored silly. And I realized what had happened is that they wanted 3 victory paths. One was very, very boring, so no one ever went for it. So they thought, oh, I should make that one worth more so that people go for it. And so they kept on increasing this number and increasing this number, increasing this number, until it was ludicrously overpowered because it was so boring.
Right.
So I'll talk for days endlessly about how making a game is about incentivizing the fun thing. they actually did the opposite. They incentivized the boring thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 3 victory paths and they're all equally fun, they should all be equally incentivized. Equally incentivized. Oh, go ahead.
If you have one that sucks, cut it.
Yeah, absolutely. Redesign that one. And I think what happened was one of the designers just really liked that style of play, but no one else did. So he was like, "This is really fun," and everyone was like, "But it's not." And so he had to keep he would watch people play. I'm a big proponent of playing your games for balance. And this is why I was sort of pushing back on the spreadsheet model. I think obviously data is good, and it's my answer was always it's useful. But I think that if you are truly worried about a card, sit down with the game, force that card to come out, and just see how effectively you can play around it, or play into it, or whatever.
Yeah, I think the way that I think about all these things, because I do consider all these things, and it's interesting because we design differently too. Like we'll be in a playtest and we'll be like, "Oh, we need to come up with a card," and you'll be like, "Here's 10 ideas in 10 seconds flat," because you're extremely good at that. and then I sit there and I'm like, well, this one doesn't really do that because of this, or this one has this weird play pattern because of this, or this one seems imbalanced because of this thing. And I'm not always right, obviously, but
I am. It's weird.
But these sorts of tools I find useful to cut through the fog and to come up with the best guess to cut down on playtesting time. So if Peter has 10 great ideas, which he always does, then exactly.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying, cool, let's playtest these 10 ideas. I'm like, which one of these seems fun? Okay, let's try that one.
Right. So I think of all these as just little tools to skip ahead in that process, to be like, you know what? I think my gut says we need to tune this up a little bit. We need to tune that down a little bit before we do the playtesting. And then, as Peter says, the playtesting is always king.
Yeah. And playtesting. What's that?
And don't worry about it.
And don't worry about it. I do think that balance. I think focusing too much on balance. Okay, I think I've said this before. I balance to the pitch. I want to make sure that you can play one full game, or ideally 2 full games, without balance problems being evident, but the fun shining through. I care 1,000 times more about the fun than I do about the balance. And again, this is a 55th episode for a reason. I balance to the pitch. And then if on your 10th game there's a problem, cool. Once the game is signed, I will solve that problem. But what happens, even with my maybe especially with my games, is it gets signed and then it gets redesigned and all your balance gets thrown out. All of it.
Exactly. If you spend ages and ages, if our AEG game, if we got 100% perfectly balanced before the pitch, which it certainly was not,
no,
then we would have had to just restart almost, because
3 times we've done massive and Critter Kitchen, Zoo Chefs weren't in it. We moved in the design diaries. We talked about how we moved the locations around. It's MVP in a different form.
Yeah, that's really
hire an artist because the theme might change. Don't fully balance your game with a spreadsheet because all those numbers are going to be thrown out. I have a game with a German publisher. Really excited for it. And the first game was literally 18 cards. It was originally made for Button Shy. No, I had to bump it up to 20 and 3 tokens. So it stopped being able to be a Button Shy game. So I pitched it to this other publisher. They were like, we love this. Great. I was like, cool, here's the files. And they came back. They were like, we want a whole different game with the same core concept. So I designed this game, really happy with it, sent it off. They were like, okay, cool. We actually want this kind of game. And this is more than I think I've ever worked on a game before. It's such a simple game, but I've had to redesign it. I think I'm on my 4th full start again redesign. And on this last one is the first time I was like, oh, I can make this symmetrical, mathematically symmetrical. All the others had been pure gut. And it didn't matter because that wasn't the part of the game that was constantly shifting. And so even doing it mathematically this time was maybe a mistake. But I was like, oh, for the first time, I see a formula with which I can generate the 60 cards rather than generating 60 cards purely by I think there's too many of this, I'm going to add some more in. It would have been such a waste of time to mathematically equate every single card in that game because the whole game has been thrown out 4 times.
Right.
AJ,
all right. Do you have some publisher advice for us?
Yes. Okay, this is a very specific, actionable one. I wrote down follow-up vaguities. What do you think that means, AJ?
If a publisher...
I'll give you a hint, vaguities is not a word.
Listen, you're the wordsmith. I would never try and call you out on that. I think vaguities would be something like a publisher says something that's vague and just making sure that you understand exactly what they mean. You clarify it. You don't just make an assumption on it. Is that what it is?
That's pretty close. What I specifically meant, and this was shorthand for me, so there's no way you could have guessed it, is I've had a publisher be like, oh, cool, look, we're not really looking at anything for 6 months. Great. Put in your calendar, follow up publisher in 6 months, reply to that same email thread, be like, hi, we talked about a game 6 months ago. You said in 6 months you might be interested. Just wanted to check in. And it's such a simple, small thing, but it means that I think we've talked about like the nightmare of getting a form email as a publisher. Like, hi, I have designed this poker variant. It is a great game and you should sign it. It's like, yeah, you did not write this to Jelly Bean Games at all.
Yeah.
You just wrote a generic email sent to everyone. By saying, hi, Tim, we talked 6 months ago and you said in 6 months' time you might be looking for something. I wanted to check in. You're treating them like a person. You've given them an actionable thing to answer based on something they said. And there is every chance that they'll be like, no, sorry, we're still not looking. Cool, reply, great. If you don't mind, I'll follow up in 6 months. Like, it takes you 10 seconds and having a competent calendar, but it can really help build that relationship with the publisher. And again, show that you see them as a human.
Good call.
Which they're not, I want to be clear. But if you pretend they are, they'll like you for it.
Mm-hmm. Shall we have some fun?
Oh, I don't know. Do you feel up to some fun?
A little bit.
Okay, let's have a little bit of fun. Not too much fun, AJ. We had too much fun last time. It was a real problem.
That's true. It was a lot of fun. What is something you wish you had the figurative strength to do or not do? Kick a habit or something like that.
Oh, that's a depressing question, isn't it? I'm addicted to heroin, AJ. Thank you for bringing that up on the podcast. No,
if you listen to all the episodes, you know that many of these are not fun questions, but they are interesting.
But the answer is fun. My answer is very boring, which is that I would like to lose some weight. In 2020, so every year I have a theme. I have a yearly theme that I do every year. 2020, it was the year of fitness. And I went from about 190 pounds down to about 155 pounds over the course of the year. Yes. And I walked for an hour every day. I mean, if you remember 2020, there was not much else to do. So I was able to really 100% control my diet and my exercise. And I exercised literally every day. I walked for about 30 to 60 minutes every single day of that year. And I 100% controlled my calorie intake because I had no choice. Well, not that I had no choice, but I was able to, I wasn't going to a restaurant. A restaurant, you're like, I don't know, maybe this is 600 calories, maybe it's 1,500 calories. I have no idea. Right. Whereas this, everything that came in, I could look at the calories and exactly track it. So I lost, however much that is, 35 pounds in a year. And then 2021, the world opened up, and I live in LA. And I don't know if you know this about LA, AJ, but there is really good food in LA. And on top of that, I got really sick at the end of the year, and I just wasn't able to exercise or particularly diet. And I just... A confluence of factors meant that I went up to 200 pounds, which was higher than when I started. This is classic yo-yo dieting. Since then, 2021, I've been about 200 pounds. I'm at 211 right now, which is I've been floating around 211 for about a year, which is not crazy. It's not like 300 pounds or anything like that. But I have, if you're watching the video, I have relatively skinny arms, maybe not as skinny as they were, but looking at my arms, you wouldn't be like, wow, what a chunky fellow. But I carry all my weight in my gut. I would stand up and show it to you, but I don't think anyone wants that. And that is the worst place for weight to be for your heart. Right. I am now BMI obese, and obviously BMI is not the most reliable thing in the world, but it still is a factor that I was at the low end of normal, and now I'm in technically obese. And my yearly theme last year was year of finance. I really wanted to get out of debt, and as you saw in our finance episode, that paid off a lot. I not only made a bunch more money than I ever have, but I also cut so much spending. And then this year, I can't remember what my theme is this year, but it's not fitness, but yeah, it's year of aging. I'm actually curious what my year is. I'm going to look that up. But next year, I'm going to do another year of fitness, and my goal is very, very, very much to lose that weight again. Year of freedom. This is my year of freedom.
I don't know what that means.
It means something to me. It basically means that I'm trying not to have obligations. I'm trying to just wake up and be like, what do I want to work on today? And this is an incredibly privileged position. In no way am I denying that. But it means that I do my best work faster and happier. My best work has always been from what am I inspired to work on today? Always. It's like a one-to-one correlation. And my goal this year, so I actually just turned down a bunch of dev jobs. I am trying to start fewer new projects with obligations. And I've also very cleverly backdoored into that year of financial freedom to finish my get out of debt plan. So this is my year of freedom where if I'm in the mood to wake up and work on a romance novel, I'm going to write a romance novel. If I wake up in the mood to work on our AEG game, I'm going to work on our AEG game. Obviously, we have a lot of scheduled meetings and stuff like that, but I am just really trying, and especially I'm not committing to weekly meetings for more than a month at a time. Because last year I had a weekly meeting every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and 3 on Friday. And that doesn't leave many days without one. And those days where I can wake up, this is now wildly off tangent, wildly tangential to your question. When I can wake up and just do whatever, I just do better work and I'm happier doing it. So next year I'm going back to a year of fitness because I got to lose this weight. It's getting ridiculous.
Until then, it's basically all free, right? You can eat whatever you want.
No, I'm trying to track calories. And I do really well, like 5 out of 7 days. And then something happens and I fall off the wagon and I don't know. My scales also sometimes, like, if it's at the wrong angle, it tells me I'm 10 pounds lower than I am. And I'm like, whoa, I'm having a great week. And then I'll do it the next day. I'm like, oh, no, I was not at all. Standard disclaimers, weight is not the be-all and end-all. I'm just aware that I am larger than I should be to be as healthy as I can be, especially with my body type.
Yeah, Peter's saying if you weigh more than him, then he hates you. That's explicitly what he is trying to say.
The other big factor is I've injured my knee. So for 6 months, I haven't been able to walk, and I love walking. I love it so much. I would go on a weekly hike with my girlfriend, and then every week or two with some friends, and I just can't hike because of my knee. I just can't do it. So I'm just a lump at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's driving me insane.
So for me, I love meat. I love dairy. I love animal products, baby. And I didn't have a problem with that until recently. Like, there are certain things that were like off limits to me. As soon as I started understanding like how veal is made and stuff like that, put a bad taste in my mouth. And then I
but it didn't. It put a delicious taste in your mouth.
True. It feels so good. I wish it wasn't from torturing baby cows.
What's the duck one?
Foie gras.
Foie gras.
Yeah, I have a little bit of that. But I try really hard not to have those kinds of things, even though I love them. And I don't eat octopus or calamari or anything like that anymore because
they're intelligent.
They're really intelligent. But then as soon as you start going down that rabbit hole, that's the thing. And bacon's the best thing ever.
Rabbits not intelligent, Ashley.
Really? I heard that pigs are more intelligent than dogs.
I said rabbits. You said once you start going down that rabbit hole.
Oh, gotcha. So I honestly wish I had the strength to be vegan. I feel like morally, I feel like I should be. This is absolutely not a judgment call on anyone. I'm not a vegan, not even remotely close. But that is something where like, I feel like morally, that's how I feel. And I know I can't ever get there.
My favorite blogger back in the day was a man called Ferret Steinmetz. He also wrote novels, including one of my favorite novels, The Uploaded. I love that book. I love it so much. And he wrote a post, in 2005 that I think about and reference all the time. And he called it condom theory. Condoms are 97% effective. And there is a certain line of thinking of like, oh, they're not 100% effective? Why bother? And the answer is because they're 97% effective. But we have, as humans, we have these like binary minds of like, oh, it doesn't work all the time? Not worth it. And so a friend of mine and I often use the shorthand condom theory to talk about like, we both fall into these all or nothing traps a lot. I am not a vegan by any means. I only drink oat milk. Probably 70% of the meals I eat have Impossible meat to replace normal meat. I have Impossible chicken nuggets. I have Impossible beef mince. I have Impossible. What's the other one I have? It's just those two. Impossible patty melts for my Impossible patty melts. And so I'm not vegan, but I'm effectively 70% vegan. And so beating yourself up is like, I wish I could be vegan. Just halve your meat content. And no, you're not vegan. But you're doing so much more than nothing that condom theory absolutely applies. In no world do I ever. This is literally the only time I've ever talked about it publicly at all, about being 70% vegan. Because what even is that? No one cares.
I mean, no one cares if you're fully vegan.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm not vegan, but I am doing way more than Peter of 2 years ago.
Right.
I love Impossible meat, by the way. If you get your hands on it, I really recommend it for stuff like I use it in spaghetti bolognese and the Impossible chicken nuggets I can't tell the difference. Literally, I have Impossible Chicken Nugget. I might as well be eating a chicken nugget. So I would experiment with Impossible Meat. Sometimes you have to prepare it differently, or sometimes you have to use it differently, but it really does an amazing job of replacing a bunch of stuff. Now, I still have bacon like once or twice a week, and that's 0% vegan, but I've cut down, like, I eat spaghetti bolognese or a patty melt an average of once a day, and none of that is now meat. I drink oat milk because I like the flavor and the calories, and also it lasts way longer in the fridge. Nothing to do with being vegan, but I was drinking a gallon of milk a week or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't ask for any of this input, but I'm giving you input anyway.
I'll tell you, I'm also not going to do any of it. For me, it's not a meal unless there's meat. If I eat, I'll have like a giant bowl of salad. I'll feel really hungry afterwards. Like,
have you tried Impossible Meat?
I have. I didn't want to to crap all over it. I don't like it, and I can't tell the difference, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's in no way is it the healthy alternative. It's like as bad for you as meat, just with none of the animal stuff. So it's like the same protein, the same calories, etc., etc.
Which, you know, if the taste was really close, and I have had sometimes it prepared in a way that it's like really close. And if it was really close, I probably would be able to like make the substitution for some of those, but step by step, see how things go in the future.
AJ, I have a question about Impossible Meat for you.
By saying goodbye, everyone.
Bye!
Thanks for joining us. You can find us and our incredible Discord community in the show notes, or reach out to us privately at funproblemspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend.